Well, hello again. I meant to get this video online a lot faster than I did. My computer started having problems. Basically had to do a whole reinstall and then reinstall all the programs and stuff that had been running. Get all my files that I backed up, put them back on, so it was a big mess. So I was planning to do this, I think 2 days ago, but didn't get to it until now. Anyway, once I got everything put back together, got everything ready to go, we're going to continue on with the Blood on the Reich series. We've already talked about Death's Messenger, Death's City, the first two in the series, so now we have, there we go, Death's Legacy. This is the third book in the series. Kind of spoiler alerts if you haven't read any of the rest of the series. Spoiler alerts for them. I'll try not to do spoilers for the actual book, at least not too many. But at the end of Death's City, basically Rudy and Hannah had to get out of Marienburg very quickly. Hannah had been basically taken as a witch. And so Rudy, at the time, he had joined the Black Caps, basically the city guard. And so using his city guard credentials, he got in, rescued Hannah, but at that point he exposed himself as someone who knew Hannah and was attached to her, and so basically he couldn't be in the city guard anymore and they had to get out. But before they did that, they had to meet up with Magnus. Now, Magnus was the rich, well-to-do villager that lived back in Rudy's village. He had a place in that village and a place there in Marienburg. And I believe I had called him Marcus in previous videos, but his name is actually Magnus. Anyway, turns out, big surprise here, that the reason that Magnus was actually living in Rudy's village was to watch Rudy. Because he was kind of the head of the Nurgle cult that had sprung up kind of around Rudy himself. Rudy didn't know this, obviously, and so he went to find Magnus, and Magnus at that point tried again to finish the ritual that they've been trying to do since even before the first book. In the first book, they tried the ritual. It got interrupted by beastmen and witch hunters and all this stuff. And that led to Rudy and Hannah fleeing for their lives from the village that they grew up in. And their first adventures, and then getting to Marienburg. Then in Marienburg, what should happen? Well, they get embroiled in the Nurgle cult again. And at that point, the witch hunter, whose name is Gerhardt, I had forgotten until just recently. Anyway, Gerhardt shows up, but so do two other people at this point. Hannah's mother shows up. Her name is Greta. And Hans Katzenjammer. Now, I had mentioned Hans before. Hans and Fritz Katzenjammer were two of the young men in Rudy's village. They were kind of bully boys. And what had happened was they found out that there were beastmen in the area. They went out looking for them to try to find out if they could take care of them, if they were a big threat, whatnot. They found a bush where the beastmen had gone through, and it was a thorn bush. And Hans tried to push Rudy into it, and Rudy, in getting out of the way, Hans ended up getting scratched on this bush and contaminated with beastmen blood, which turned him into a mutant. And so he fled the village. Fritz fled the village. Hans and Fritz fled the village because at that point the witch hunter wanted to kill Fritz, or kill Hans. He was a mutant. What do you do with mutants? You kill them. The only good mutant is a dead mutant. Fritz had to leave because he was harboring a mutant. Even though basically Fritz didn't really even know his brother had been turning into a mutant. He basically shut himself in his room and wouldn't come out. Wouldn't let anybody in. They knew something was wrong with him, but they thought he was just sick, because that had been going around. Anyway, Hans shows up in all his awful glory. Horns, 3 eyes, really thick skin that could take sword blows, really super strong, super quick. Basically, Greta and Hans show up, and they start ripping apart this Nurgle cult. Who else should show up? Gerhardt, the witch hunter. He shows up, of course, too, and starts wrecking the place as well. So Rudy finds out that through all of this, that he actually has family still. They don't live there in Marienburg, or I shouldn't say he has family still. His family originally came from Altdorf, the capital of the Empire. So he fled the Empire to get away from Gerhardt, to get away from the witch hunters, and now he has to go back into the Empire with Hannah, who's also wanted for witchcraft, and they have to go basically to the capital city of the Empire. So in going back to the Empire, they find out about a secret organization called the Silver Wheel. The Silver Wheel is basically a loose confederation of hedge wizards and hedge witches. Those who hadn't gone to the colleges and received basically the protection of the Empire. Because they were properly trained. I'm doing air quotes again. Anyway, they get out of Marienburg, skin of their teeth kind of situation here, and head up to Altdorf. Basically, as they go, Rudy is hoping that Hannah can be admitted to one of the colleges. The mark was removed from her by her mother, so she now has access to her powers again. And they figure if she can get accepted to one of these colleges, she'll be safe from the witch hunter. The witch hunter will not be able to touch her. She'll be protected by the college, and she'll be able to learn to use her powers and everything. And then one day she'll be a full wizard and no longer wanted for basically heresy at this point. Rudy's hoping as well to find out more about himself, why these Nurglites keep coming and trying to find him and perform this ritual around him. He does know that there's something wrong with him, that there's something bound to his soul at this point, and he's trying to find out how to escape, because the only thing that he can do at this point is basically run away from the witch hunters. This is very much a totalitarian kind of situation that the Empire is in. They have very, very low tolerance for anything that smacks of chaos. Any deviation from the norm, and you are almost automatically killed. The witch hunters find you, burn you at the stake. It's just as easy as that. So they start going back to the capital of the Empire, hoping that their situation will be better. If they can fix what's wrong with Rudy, and if Hannah can get into the proper colleges of magic. They run into various friends and it's so hard to say allies and things, because the alliances are kind of fluid as they go along. So people who were once allies to them, now they're allied with the witch hunter, or vice versa. And so because of that, the alliances switch, and so they run into people who've helped or hindered them in the past. And it's all really well woven together at this point to tie up all those loose ends, to bring people in who who had touched on the story and then gone away, and now they're coming back to finish their arc and to finish their part of the story. Sandy Mitchell does a really good job of keeping these things going, keeping the strands of the story straight, so that he can spin them off, so that somebody comes in, they disappear, and then they come back later at a later point in the story, and their part of the story then gets its denouement, and they're finished with them, and they move on to the next part of the story. So, for instance, there's a band of mercenaries that they met up with in the first book, and they ran into them again in the second, and then they run into them for a third time in the third book. So their story comes in, touches on them in the first book. They find the alliance shifting in the second book, and then in the end, the third book, everything is resolved with that particular band of mercenaries. So like I said, he does a really good job of weaving these things together through the arc of the story from the first book to the third book. So once again, Sandy Mitchell does a great job with these books. I really liked the Blood on the Reich series, but not quite as good as his Caiaphas Cain stuff. I'm going to keep going back to that because I really, really enjoyed that series. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Blood on the Reich, just not as much. Anyway, I will say, and this is a spoiler alert for the third book, Rudy finally does figure out what's wrong with him, and it stems back to something his parents did that got them turned in by the witch hunters. And Rudy does make it back to Altdorf and meets up with his relations, and they figure out what's going on with Rudy. But if you think Rudy and Hannah, who the whole time I'm sitting here reading, I'm wanting Rudy and Hannah to be together. They threw them together. There's chemistry between them. They're attracted to each other. Things pop up and happen, and they don't know how to handle the situation where, like, for instance, Rudy is interested in Hannah, but he's not sure how to approach her about it, and so he kind of backs off, and because he does that, she gets involved with another guy who's, doesn't see Rudy as a threat or as a rival or anything like that, because Rudy has kind of moved himself off, kind of distanced himself. And so because he's done that, Hannah gets involved with someone else. And then they get thrown back together because of the situations of their lives. And because of that, you think, well, this is going to be a happy ending. They're going to get together and everything. But then you remember, this is Warhammer. And there's never been a happy ending in book 1 or book 2, so why would there be a happy ending in book 3? There isn't one, people. No happy ending in book 3. They do stave off, once again, the apocalypse for another day. And that's basically all you get out of these, out of the Warhammer books. Very good read, but once again, if you're looking for a happy ending, if you're looking for that kind of stuff, do not read this series. You will be disappointed. If you know that this is Warhammer and you are expecting, I shouldn't say that you will be disappointed. The thing is that sometimes the story demands to have that bad ending. And by bad ending, I just mean that that the ending is not the happy, they lived happily ever after kind of ending. The ending just, it is an ending. Everything's wrapped up. I felt good when I got to the end in that the story was all wrapped up and it logically concluded. But again, I felt bad for the protagonists of the story because they didn't really get their happy ending. So, for instance, there was a very good movie that I watched. It was called A Chinese Ghost Story. and in it, the hero of the story falls in love with a ghost, and she's being manipulated by a vampire. She gets sold off to the king of hell. The hero of the story gets in league with a monk. They go into hell. They beat the king of hell. They save the girl's soul, and they don't get to be together. She's dead. Basically, all they get to do is take her ashes and rebury them somewhere else, so that she can then be reincarnated and have a happy ending for herself. She's no longer a slave to the king of hell, but the ghost and the hero were in love with each other, but they couldn't be together. But it was a good ending. Bad for, that kind of thing where you're thinking, yay, the hero gets the girl. But it was a good ending. Same with this. It was a good ending in a bad way, if that makes sense. Anyway, that was the Blood on the Reich series. I will move on to a different set of books or book, depending on my whimsy, for the next one. So enjoy reading, and again, if you like this, like and subscribe, hey, in the comments, let me know if you liked this series, if you've read it. If you haven't read it, let me know what books you have read that you might want me to talk about, because, hey, I'll talk about them. Even if I haven't read them, I'll try to find something out about them and talk about them. If I have read it, definitely talk about it. So let me know.